Well, measles was eliminated in 1998, but it is back. Now, the highly contagious disease is spreading in some Canadian communities. Yesterday, British Columbia recorded its first case of measles since 2019. As of today, there are more than a dozen cases of measles in Canada. Now, most of them have been reported in Quebec. In Manitoba, we don't have any cases yet. But as I've been alluding to with spring break on the way, there's a lot of families with questions about how you know if you're fully immunized. What does that mean? Are you fully protected? How many years does the stuff last? And what about your kids and other loved ones as well? So with all the information out there about the risks around measles, we're going to have a primer on next about what you need to know about staying safe and helping to prevent a further outbreak. Dr. Joss Reimer is president-elect of the Canadian Medical Association and in studio with us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So what is behind the reemergence in measles?
You know, the big thing is really the decrease in vaccinations that we're seeing across the globe. I think with COVID, we sort of hoped that everyone would see how successful vaccines can be. And instead, we saw a lot of misinformation. We saw a lot of people taking advantage of this moment to make money, to sell different products. And what we've seen instead is a decrease. Now, some of that's not around misinformation. Some of it's just because public health had trouble getting into schools. People were staying home. And so some kids just missed their regular vaccines. But whatever the reason is, the lower rates really give something like measles an opportunity to spread because it's so incredibly infectious. So it just needs a small window of susceptible people for it to be able to spread.
What are the symptoms? Remind us of the symptoms.
The big things you're going to see are, you get red eyes, you get flu-like symptoms, so just feeling really unwell, fever, muscle aches. And then there's that classic rash, and sometimes it's even in the mouth. So it's all over the body, in the mouth. What we really worry about, though, is the people who get more ill. And up to, 25% of kids who get measles will end up in the hospital. So it's a pretty severe illness because you can get things like pneumonia. You can get encephalitis, which is an inflammation of the brain. And some kids will die with measles. So it's not a benign, it's not a minor illness. It is something we really worry about.
Because we've talked about COVID so much, and so everyone's used to sort of understanding the spread of, of COVID. When you say it's highly contagious, can you contrast measles to COVID in terms of how quickly this can spread when you look at the seriousness of measles?
Yeah, measles is one of the most infectious bugs out there. It's really remarkable because, for every 10 people who are exposed and are susceptible, 9 of them will get infected. So 9 out of 10 susceptible people getting infected is a very high number. And that's because it hangs out in the air. So not only can you get it from interacting with someone, face to face, but it'll stay in the air for up to 2 hours after someone leaves a room. So even if you never interacted with that person, if they happen to have been in the room that you're in 2 hours later, you still could get infected. And people are usually infectious before they have that classic rash. So they may not even know to avoid public spaces because they may not have those classic symptoms yet. So it's tough to know if you're infectious, and it hangs out in the air. So those are the big 2 reasons why it spreads so easily.
What's it like as a doctor to watch this make a comeback because of, as you said, partly because of misinformation and people making choices not to be vaccinated?
Honestly, it's devastating because we have the tools and we know how well they work. If you get 2 doses of a measles vaccine, it's 97% effective. It's incredibly good at protecting people. And so when we have those tools and you see all that misinformation out there and you see people who are rightly confused because they're getting bombarded with information, some of it's true, some of it's not true. It's so heartbreaking as a physician to see people, particularly those young kids, seeing them at risk, potentially getting really ill when we know we have the tools to protect them.
So you mentioned 2 shots. How many vaccine shots for full protection? Is it just the 2? And how does it differ by age group and such?
Yeah, that's a great question. So anybody who's born before 1970, we pretty much assume you're immune because measles used to be spreading all the time, so that you've probably been exposed already. If you're born between 1970 and 1985, then we recommend 1 dose. And most of those folks did get 1 dose because it was really regular to get a dose at that point. But double checking is a great idea. And then anyone born after 1985 should get 2 doses. Usually they're given at 1 year of age and again at sort of 4 to 6 years, so that preschool time. But some people may have missed a dose because of COVID, because of other reasons. And the really great thing is that all of the physicians in Manitoba have access to immunization records. So not only can you call your public health office, your local public health office, who can look that up for you, but your physician will also be able to look that up for you and tell you if you've had 0 doses, 1 dose, 2 doses, and they can help get you caught up if you need to be.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat that. Call the public health office or call your physician if you want to check on when's the last, have I had my doses? Do I need new shots? Check on your whole family.
Absolutely.
Those records all exist.
It's a great idea, especially if you're going to travel. We don't have measles in Manitoba yet, but what I'm really worried about is what we're seeing in Quebec. They've had a number of cases with no travel history. So that means they were exposed in Quebec. They were infected in Quebec. So it is spreading already in that province. And, I heard Dr. Singh from Public Health say it, but it's a plane ride away. Yeah. And so when you mention spring break, if folks are going to Europe, if they're going to Quebec, and many other parts of the world, it is possible to bring it back. And we know that our vaccine rates are lower than they should be. You really need about 90% of the population to be immune to prevent a measles outbreak. And we're not there.
Where are we at with herd immunity in Manitoba?
The newest numbers are going to be coming out, I think, next week from Public Health. So I'd say keep your eye out for the new numbers. But we know they've dropped down, that they're below 90. They may even be below 80. But let's wait for the new numbers to come out so we can get a better number.
So we've heard about a blood test to see if you already have immunity. Have you heard about this? How does it work? And do you have to pay for it?
Really, because the vaccine is so low risk and it's free, we really, for the most part, say if you don't have any record that you've been immunized, get a dose. I don't want people to have to go through getting a needle poke to have their blood drawn. It's a much bigger needle than an immunization. And so if you're born after 1985, you haven't had 2 doses, I wouldn't even worry about testing for immunity. Just get that second dose.
We talked about symptoms, but what's the first thing that shows up with measles? Does it present just like a cold? That's a challenge, right?
Yeah, the first thing is sort of a general unwell, kind of like the flu. So, fever, you might have some swelling, some people get a cough. It can have a variety of different symptoms. So that's what you're watching for first, but you're not going to know it's measles at first. And that's the tricky part because you are infectious at that point.
Any side effects to the vaccine?
So everything we do in medicine, including, naturopathic therapies, including the drive to the clinic, everything we do has risks, and the measles vaccine is no exception, but they're incredibly low. It's 1 in a million who will have a bad outcome from the vaccine and 999,999 people who will not have a bad outcome. The numbers are far worse for measles. What we see is, like I said, up to a quarter of kids ending up in the hospital. 1 in 1,000 will get that encephalitis. 1 in 1,000, up to 1 in 1,000 in Canada will die. So, that's serious. Those are scary numbers. So I don't want people to be scared of the vaccine when we know measles is so much scarier.
Thank you very much for coming in. Anything I didn't ask that you feel the public should know this morning?
Check all of your vaccines. We know Public Health stopped going to the schools for a little bit because we were so wrapped up in dealing with COVID. And so it's possible your kids have missed other vaccines as well. And the last thing we want is to see any other bugs getting that opportunity to spread.
Thank you very much for being in studio.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Joss Reimer is president-elect of the Canadian Medical Association.